We talked about all of these initiatives that were happening, but we still haven't seen results. Words and action are two completely different things.
When we heard from students on Lawrence University campus, we heard from them loud and clear that their experiences in Appleton were not acceptable. And so as the city, we were working with them around building a more welcoming community for them.
I posted the list of demands, which was a public document that had been shared publicly before, onto our Facebook page with a statement from me being the CODA chair.
Feeling the need to address our concerns in a very strategic and very formatted way where people could actually voice their concerns. All of this kind of stemmed from a lack of accountability and a lack of feeling that the administration is actually hearing us.
The quality of life in Appleton is very, very different when compared to communities of our size, both in Wisconsin and elsewhere. This is a real special place, and that doesn't happen accidentally.
When I became mayor, I mean, the city's population was less than 10% people of color. I think it was hovering around 7 or 8%. And today, it's around 18%, and we are very quickly heading over 20% and close to 25 in the next 10 years. So our diverse population is growing, and growing very quickly.
Over the last 5 years or so, we've had a few hate crime-like incidents that have happened. But as far as students being singled out or victimized, it's pretty rare. I was surprised to learn, to hear from students that felt walking through downtown, say for instance to the drugstore, was something that they did uncomfortably. And that's I guess, was an eye-opener for me.
You have to physically and mentally prepare yourself for that, of like, oh, is today going to be another day where I get called the N-word?
You know, for the majority of the community, Appleton seems to be a great place to live, but for some individuals, it isn't the most welcoming place. Just that, you know, those stories that we hear from those individuals, I think, are frustrating because it isn't what we want Appleton to be.
So I think as a person of color living in Appleton, there's definitely always like a continual adjustment that I have to do, kind of adjusting like myself and who I am. Because I remember like recently I was at like a meeting for work and this lady like asked how to pronounce my name. And she, after I like said it to her, like how to pronounce it, she was like, oh, yeah, you gotta like be patient with me. Like that stuff is scary. Like we don't have these names up here.
We know of stories like that. We know of stories where people just automatically come up and touch a black woman's hair. People might not think that's racism, but that's outright racism, that somebody thinks they have the right to a black woman's body.
We really need to put a stop to that, rather than just making it very normalized.
I was at one of our middle schools and I had a African-American girl in the group that I was talking to, and I looked at her and I said, so, you know, how are you doing? How do you like Appleton? How's your family doing? And she told the story of my mom and dad brought us here from Milwaukee because they wanted to be somewhere that they felt was more safe. And then she went on to say, but we don't feel very welcome here, and they're thinking about moving. And that just broke my heart. It's like, I think I was kind of shaken out of my naivete, and I thought that we've got to do something about this. It's not right.
I think racism on College Avenue has taken on a very upfront form. People are getting verbally assaulted on a daily basis. I can hear, because my room faces College Avenue, I can hear people getting verbally assaulted from my room. And this red car comes like driving by really slow, and it seemed like a very intentional act. And so they rolled by and they said, "You go suck that fat cock, you nigger." And there were two white men, and so these are very real experiences that are very, very terrifying.
It was New Year's Eve, and we had went downtown to get food from a Mr. Taco.
We'd first entered into Mr. Taco, trying to get through all of these people who were pretty drunk.
We were trying to get to the counter to order our food. This one guy who was of African American descent, he comes up to my friend, and as she's eating her taco, mind you, and he starts, kind of getting really close to her, almost, spitting in her food as he's.
Then it kind of escalated from me to asking him to move to, like, within 2 minutes, he was calling me the N-word lover, and he was calling Danny racial slurs.
I remember there being a lot of, white females with him, and they ended up joining in on the racial slurs towards my friend. They started calling her the N-word lover as well.
So we had gotten up, and they had followed us. I remember security pushing Danny.
It made everything worse because, we're all outside. The people who are saying the racial slurs. And
as I was walking out, I remember getting slammed into the side of the wall, and my hair was getting pulled. I'm assuming it was one of the girls. Then we walked out, and I had lost Danny. There was like 10 of them, and they had surrounded both of us. I had turned around to see where my friend was, and somebody had whacked me in the face.
They pushed me on the floor for some reason. I didn't say anything aside from, hey, can you guys stop?
I don't understand why nobody did anything. Humanity was just like kind of lost at the very end. When I got punched in the face and he got thrown to the ground, it was kind of like you wanted to stop the situation. Say, what the fuck are you guys doing? What do we stop? Like, why?
Why didn't I know about this? I think that's the thing I was most upset about, was why has it taken this long for somebody to point this out to me? And you start to think about why that might happen. Number one, I'm white. It doesn't happen to me when I walk downtown, and it won't happen to me.
I think it's important that we understand that because we haven't heard that this happens, or we haven't had it happen to us, where we've been singled out because we are persons not of color. It's important to be empathetic. It's important to create an atmosphere where when you hear things that you feel that it's your responsibility to call people out on that. And that's very hard to do when you're talking about coworkers or family members or friends, that this is not something that's acceptable in Appleton. Our community has told us that, and I think the discussion on campus has opened some eyes that in 2016, 2015, this still happens, regardless of how prevalent or how many times it should be concerning for a community. And I think that's what you saw once students returned in 16 was the gathering of other city staff, of other people in the community to learn more about the scope of the problem. We agreed that there needs to be a more accessible way for students to report incidents that happen to them on campus. And then through the relationship with the police department and the university, things will be directed to our attention that probably warrant police investigation or follow-up, or to at least track the data so that we know what's happening both in our downtown or wherever else students and staff might have experiences that we need to know about in the community.
We talked about all of these initiatives that were happening, but we still haven't seen results. Words and action are two completely different things. So a bunch of students met at Main Hall steps. We marched down College Avenue in silence. It was a rainy, cold day, and we sat in silence, and cars were going by, slowing down, looking at us. And then after that, we got back up, and we marched into the farmers market in City Hall.
I think the students, through their protest, educated the community, and that is not what they're supposed to be doing when they're here. They're supposed to be getting an education for themselves, but they got to the point where they were tired of not being heard, and so they protested, and their signs were both messages to Lawrence University campus, because there were some messages there directly to Lawrence, as well as to the community at large. And so when that happened, I think it did shake up people a little bit. It woke some people up. Some other people resisted the idea that a protest was the right way to do it. I would say that, you know, if you look at Dr. King and just every civil rights movement in history, there's always protests.
Our role here is to be academics and to be scholars and to get an education, and a lot of that turns into us like being the educators and being the ones who like speak for our cultures and our backgrounds and things like that. So being the person to like constantly educate others because they're not wanting to educate themselves, I think that takes a lot from a person.
I think some of the most challenging moments in dealing with race and racism in the city of Appleton has been educating white people and educating people who don't identify as people of color. You know, we hear from people that, oh, racism isn't an issue in Appleton. I've never seen it. And it's usually, I hear that sometimes from, you know, a 45-year-old white guy who, of course, you know, I would expect that maybe you haven't seen or heard racism. Racism is like a cancer. You have to get, you know, I don't know that we'll ever get rid of the cancer of racism, but we certainly have to start to chip away at it and get rid of what we can get rid of in Appleton. And that's, you know, what we hope to do is change attitudes and behaviors of individuals who are the persons who are the perpetrators of, you know, yelling things or throwing things at students, which we've heard those as well, or not just students, but other people in Appleton too, because it's not just students who have reported racism to this office, it's the community in general we hear from as well.